Okay, so we were discussing electrophoresis, and we discussed the electrophoresis of chromosomal DNA, the electrophoresis of high molecular weight chromosomal DNA, of shared chromosomal DNA, of plasmid DNA, and then we also discussed a little bit about electrophoresis of oligonucleotides. So then for electrophoresis of oligonucleotides, we discussed that you can use polyacrylamide gel. You remember that? So, but then when we are visualizing polyacrylamide gel, students, these gels are, we discussed in the last class that these gels are performed in a vertical gel assembly apparatus. You remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Right, so these gels are actually very, very thin, and therefore the optimum concentration that is required for visualization by ethidium bromide is not there. So, for example, if you remember in Agarose gel, we can load like up to 1 microgram DNA without any problems, and the wells can be made broader and you can combine two wells. So here also, in fact, you can combine two wells or three wells, but still the gel is very, very thin, very, very thin. Whereas Agarose gel, you can increase the thickness by pouring more amount of Agarose, right? So in this case, the dye that is used for visualization is usually, people do not use ethidium bromide because it is less sensitive. So the dyes that are used are fluorescent dyes. Fluorescent dyes, and the examples are Cypro or Cyber Green or Cyber Safe. So these are examples of fluorescent dyes. They are very, very sensitive, and hence they are used. Among visible dyes,
Ma'am, what does it mean by like sensitive ethidium bromide? We are not using here.
we are not using ethidium bromide, Ratnesh, because ethidium bromide requires a certain concentration. So, for example, you need to have at least enough concentration, up to 40 nanogram of DNA is visible by ethidium bromide under UV light. Whereas if the DNA is like, for example, in the range of 1 nanogram, 2 nanogram, 5 nanogram, then if we use ethidium bromide, Ratnesh, then you will not be able to see it on a gel. So you need to use dyes such as fluorescent dyes, which can be observed under a fluorescent, like in a fluorimeter or in a chemidog, which has a possibility of detection of fluorescence. So there you can use these fluorescent dyes. All right.
Yeah, ma'am, but I didn't understand like ethidium bromide, like what it does, like
Ethidium, yes.
in a small case, in a small
Exactly.
fragments, it will be not visible, like it will be not fluorescent.
Just keep, no, just
Uh,
keep Ratnesh. So the point is that when we say sensitivity, this is about sensitivity of detection. Okay. So when we say fluorescent dyes, that means whenever, wherever we are using fluorescent dyes, you can detect very, very less concentrations. That is what is sensitivity. That means even very less amount can be picked up by a fluorescent microscope or a fluorimeter, which
ma'am,
is
but
not. Hmm.
ethidium bromide is not fluorescent, like.
The ethidium bromide, actually it works under UV. You can observe it under UV, but when we talk about fluorescence, it's a different phenomenon. So when we say
Oh, okay.
fluorescence, you remember it's excitation, and then there is a Stokes shift. You remember that? And then,
Oh,
so the phenomenon is slightly different.
okay, ma'am. Okay, okay.
So fluorescent dyes are always considered very, very sensitive. Whether we talk about, I mean, their sensitivity is kind of comparable to radioisotopes or even better. Like radioisotopes can be detected by X-ray film. Likewise, fluorescent dyes can also be detected. Even better sensitivity is obtained with fluorescent dyes. Is this making sense or no?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Mm.
Okay. So then,
Ma'am, one more question.
huh,
Ma'am, why do
yes.
we use ETBR when we can use the fluorescent dyes? Because in order to observe, we'll need UV light, and that could lead to mutations in the DNA.
Yes, that is true. So the point is that when we talk about fluorescent dyes, so there are two problems. Problem number one, that when we are using fluorescent dyes, fluorescent dyes are prone to bleaching. Right. So for example, many a times which you will learn in the later classes, like for example, we have isolated a chromosome, right? A genomic DNA. Now we are analyzing it on a gel, right? On a gel, let us say you found a band. Now what is the next step? Are you happy with just isolated DNA, or you want to proceed with that, right? So for example, you want to proceed with the step of, for example, like your gene of interest is in the genome. For example, you are interested in identifying the gene of, let's say, green fluorescence protein, or any, you can take any example, insulin. The gene for insulin is present in the chromosome of eukaryotes, right? So then we want to obtain the gene for insulin, for example. So in this case, you need to proceed with the genomic DNA, right? So that means many a times we have to run the gel, run an agarose gel, and or an acrylamide gel, and sometimes we have to cut the band and elute the DNA. I mean, extract the DNA from the agarose or polyacrylamide. So this method is called gel elution, which you will learn in the later classes. But then the point is, when we talk about gel elution, you need to cut the band. So when we are cutting the band, if we are using fluorescent dyes, you cannot expose the gel for longer time, because the fluorescence will start bleaching. And if you will take longer, the band will disappear because the dye would have bleached. Right, Ashi?
Right, ma'am.
That is one problem. The second problem is the equipment. So the gel documentation unit, which is conventionally available, is like cheap. It's a cost-effective device. Whereas when we talk about fluorescence-based equipments, they are the prices are on the higher side. Point number three, when we are actually performing the experiments in a lab, for example, like UG lab, where at least 5 or 6 labs are going on, you require complete darkness because fluorescence can bleach again. So you need to have like minimum exposure of light. So therefore, fluorescent dyes are used. When we will discuss PCR, I will give you examples where fluorescent dyes are used. But otherwise, I guess ETBR, I think students are using because of the ease of use, because of the ease of detection, because when students are new, they will take long to cut the band. So for several reasons of this sort. But otherwise, yes, fluorescent dyes are safe, and that is why the name cyber safe is there. So these are safe dyes, so people are slowly switching to them, but still ETBR has its own place.
Got it, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am, in the case of fish, like in banding, like gene detection, like is it work like this? Does this work like that, like same?
Does it work like what?
Fish,
Fish.
FISH.
FISH is fluorescence in situ hybridization, right? So Ratnesh, when we do fish is usually performed using cells, right? So you don't have to isolate the DNA, you perform it on the cells. So what is done is that you permeabilize the cells and then insert the fluorescent probes. So then once you allow the hybridization to happen, then actually you observe it under a microscope.
So ma'am, the probes are created by these fluorescent dyes.
Yes, they are created by fluorescent dyes, yes.
Okay.
And they are also prone to bleaching.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. But then the point is that when you are performing fish, it is mainly for capturing the images. You just observe the localization of the chromosome, right? And these are fixed cells. So you are not going to cut a band, or you are not going to proceed further. You just observe it and then you are done away with it. You just see that, okay, my chromosome is localized at the edge, or my chromosome is localized in the nucleus, or it is everywhere, or it is at the septation region, right? And then that's an observation, and then the cells are also dead because these are permeabilized cells, and then you just capture the images, analyze them, and that's it. You're not going to use them further. That's the point I'm trying to make. Followed or no?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Deepak, Gopika, Dhwani, are you people following?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So the other dye that is used is methylene blue. It's a visible dye. So many a times class, so many a times when we talk about oligonucleotides, we also sometimes are interested in observing single-stranded DNA. So then the question is how to observe single-stranded DNA. So can we observe single-stranded DNA? So the basic principle of observing the double-stranded DNA, whether it's ETBR, that is ethidium bromide, or whether it is a fluorescent dye, the basis is the dye intercalates between the double-stranded DNA. Correct. So now my question is, what will happen if we are observing single-stranded DNA? And how can we observe them?
Ma'am, we can use like another single-stranded fluorescent like DNA.
That is
Like
hybridization.
probe. Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Hybridization.
right. But then, Ratnesh, I have to tell you that maybe we'll discuss this in a little more detail in the next, I mean, after 3 or 4 classes when I'll be teaching you blotting. But on a gel, hybridization is not possible. On a gel, hybridization is not possible because hybridization requires a certain temperature, right? And that temperature is, lights are going all the time, so that temperature is almost equivalent to the melting temperature of the DNA, right? And the melting temperature depends upon the GC content of the DNA,
Yes, ma'am.
right?
Yes.
So therefore whenever we want to hybridize, the hybridization can happen just below the TM. Yes, or
Yes,
equal
ma'am.
to the TM. Yes, so therefore the moment you heat the gel, agarose will start melting. Polyacrylamide, I mean the mechanical stability will be gone. So hybridization will not work on a gel. Hybridization is performed on a membrane, which I will tell you later. So in principle it is possible, but because of the limitations of the gel matrix, we cannot use. So any other suggestions? How can we use, how can we observe single-stranded DNA? Any guesses? Gopika, is the question clear, class? Is the question clear?
Yes, ma'am, the question is clear.
So how can we observe single-stranded DNA? Just keen. Okay, maybe I'll tell you the answer. So single-stranded DNA, what happens is that when we talk about single-stranded DNA, usually single-stranded DNA is observed using a dye called acridine orange. It is used because of the high sensitivity, but then the point is that the way it works is in single-stranded DNA also. Maybe I'll write the sequence and then maybe you people can understand. So in this single-stranded DNA, what is the observation? In just from the sequence, do you see something?
There are quite a few instances of the same base being repeated.
Okay. What about this? What is happening over here? This and this can pair or no?
Yes, ma'am. I guess they can make loops
Exactly.
like an RNA.
Exactly.
Yes, ma'am. They can fold back and create like double helix. Double helix. Yes.
So that is why these loops are called as hairpin loops, and I'll be referring to these in a number of classes later as well. So whenever you have such sequences, they can form hairpin loops, and it is these hairpin loops where the dye can actually get intercalated, and then you can observe the single-stranded DNA as well. So usually most of the single-stranded DNA sequences, if you try analyzing the sequence carefully class, you will find that such hairpin loops will be there. I mean, even when I'll be discussing so I hope this mechanism is clear. I mean, the formation of hairpin loops is clear to the class. I'll be referring to this in a number of lectures. For example, even in transcription, this will be useful. So is it making sense or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Everybody?
Yes.
So this was the point that I wanted to tell you, that we can use several such dyes on polyacrylamide gel, and then we can observe single-stranded DNA or we can observe double-stranded DNA. Now the question that we were discussing in yesterday's class was, if you have two DNA molecules having identical size, then the technique that is used is called denaturing gradient gel electrophoresis, right? So, who is going to brief what we discussed in yesterday's class? So, let me see. Ayush, would you like to brief?
So, we use denaturing gradient gel electrophoresis for oligonucleotides. So
Very
we
good.
use vertical system because
Yes.
uh, it prevents from the light, because light can enable the uh, it, light can interference between the free radical mechanism of the of the polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis.
Yeah.
Also air, we use a vertical system to prevent this from the air, because air
Yes.
can also destabilizes the radical mechanism. So in which we uses gradient of the denatured substance. So
Right.
we got the DNA molecules on the basis of their GC content, uh, and it is directly proportional, and the distance traveled by the oligonucleotide is directly proportional to the GC content.
Very good. So I think more or less Ayush has summarized it well. So we discussed that you can prepare a gel which has, for example, low denaturant at the top, high denaturant at the bottom, and actually it's a gradient. And then once you run the gel class, so for example, if it is a double stranded DNA, right? So denaturant means in the presence of denaturant, the double stranded DNA will actually denature. Correct. So what will happen is the two strands can fall apart, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So what is done, class? What is done is to avoid this separation of the two strands. What is done is a clamp is used. The meaning of the clamp is something which holds. So it's like, you can imagine, it's like a paper clip or something. So here it's a GC clamp, which actually GC, the reason GC word is used because the sequence is rich in GC. And GC, so there is a triple bond between G and C and double bond between A and T, right? So what happens is that when you have a GC clamp at the end of the double stranded DNA, then what will happen is when it will be coming in contact with the denaturant, then the two strands will not fall apart, but what will happen is it will result in a formation of a structure which will be like a fork, like a Y-shaped structure, right? So the above ends of the Y are like the strands of the double-stranded DNA, and the bottom, like the branching point, the middle, I mean, what you call the end point is actually the GC clamp, which is actually holding the two together, the two strands together. So then the question is, how is this GC clamp coming in? So what is done is that when you separate these double-stranded DNA molecules, then in fact what you do is you try to join a sequence which is like a small sequence of a few bases. Few means it could be like 10 to 15 bases long, which is only rich in GC, and then you allow it to join. I'm not using the word ligation because I haven't taught you. I'm not using the word PCR because I haven't taught you, but then ultimately both ligation and PCR can be used. But for now, if you understand this much, that the GC clamp will actually join to the double-stranded DNA, and the purpose of this GC clamp is to prevent the two strands from falling apart, and ultimately you have a Y-shaped structure formed, which will actually separate depending upon the concentration of the denaturant. Hope it is clear to the class. And this is how the Ratnesh, not clear?
No, ma'am, clear.
So then if you see the equipment we discussed in yesterday's class, you have a magnetic stirrer, you have a peristaltic pump, and you have a gel casting apparatus. So in the magnetic stirrer you keep two containers, one containing low concentration of denaturant, one containing high concentration of denaturant, and then they are connected with a silicone tubing, and finally you will cast the gel. So I will show you the video now for the preparation of this gel, but then I will not show you the complete video because it's already 9:30. I'll show you just the glimpses and then you can watch it later. So the video is here. Class, can you see it or no? Not yet?
No, ma'am, we can't.
Now? No?
No, ma'am.
We can see.
Not yet?
No, ma'am, we can see.
Acha, okay.
Okay, so this video is to demonstrate how to set up and run a DGG gel using the Cleveland Scientific DGG kit. So we've got our magnetic stirrer. On top of that, we've got gradient mixer. That's connected to a peristaltic pump. This is the model MUD02. And then that's feeding into the casting base with the glass plates. We've got that connected to a gel loading tip, which is going to be controlling the flow of gel into the glass plates. So we've already made all of our solutions that are outlined in the manual. We've got our MUD02 pump set to 12 RPM, which equates to 10 milliliters per minute. So this will be different on the different models of pump, but you can easily test it. And they're also written with the different types of tubing in the manual, what the flow rates will be. So we're going to add our polymerizing agents into our solutions now, and then we'll start casting the gel. So we've got our first solution going into the first well of the gradient mixer. I'm going to turn on that magnetic stirrer. So this is, in the first one, the high denaturing solution, and we've also got an amount of DNA dye in there, which is going to indicate the gradient of the gel once it's been poured. low denaturing solution.
So this equipment is.
We're going to open the first valve, and we're going to turn on the pump.
So class, maybe I will share with you the link and you can observe it later, otherwise we will lose the entire time. But then I think the equipment is clear. I mean, you could see at least the assembly, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
And I will email you the link and then you can observe it, visualize it, right? And when you will be back to the campus, then in fact it is there in the department, so you can have a look. So then the next question is, class. So you have now followed separation of oligonucleotides, separation of plasmids, separation of chromosomes. But then, for example, many a times the DNA is not present alone. DNA is present along with proteins. So when we are isolating the DNA, we actually remove the proteins using proteinase K. You remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. But then what happens is that, have you, I mean, can you think of like how people found that histones bind to DNA? Which technique they would have used? Can electrophoresis help in answering the question like which proteins are bound to DNA, and then if we can say that okay, one molecule of histone is bound to DNA, or two molecules of histone is bound to DNA, or 8 molecules actually can bind to 146 base pair of DNA. So for separation of 146 base pair, which gel should be used? अरे सारे जेल्स पढ़ा दिए, सब भूल गए.
Ma'am, DGGE low.
DGG.
Polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis.
Yes, very good, Ayush. Polyacrylamide gel is used. Ratnesh, DGG is used when you are trying to separate two DNA of equal size. Here I am trying to ask you, like 146 base pair ka DNA, we should run in which gel? Should we use both?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Right, so the answer is yes, we should use polyacrylamide gel. Now what will happen is to this 146 base pair DNA, 146 base pair DNA, what you can do is you can incubate it with histone, for example H2A, right? So what will happen, class, in terms of its mobility? You are going to tell me, I will not answer it every time.
It should decrease, right?
It's very good, it should decrease. Now if you add another histone molecule, then
It should decrease further.
yes, yes. So this is the basis which is used in studying DNA protein interactions, and the technique is called as, because it is decreasing, so therefore the technique is called as gel retardation assay. Why it is called retardation? Because the bands are retarded, right? The mobility is decreased. So the mobility of bands is retarded, and therefore the technique is called as gel retardation assay. It is also called as EMSA, which is electrophoretic mobility shift assay. So why it is called electrophoretic mobility shift assay? Because in this case the electrophoretic mobility is shifted because of the binding of the protein to the DNA. Following or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody in the class? For example, if the DNA, so let me make the DNA like this. So if the DNA, the movement of DNA is here, right, in a gel which has a well somewhere here, This is the top of the well, I mean the top of the gel. The wells are here. So the mobility of DNA of 146 base pair is here. So then class, when for example, if you have DNA with H2A, so then the mobility will be here or the mobility will be here. Who's going to answer this? Or let's say if I have drawn 3 bands like this and you are going to label one is free DNA. Free DNA means just 146 base pair of DNA. One of the band is 146 base pair DNA bound with histone H2A. The other one is bound with histone H2A and H2B. Now label the bands. Class, don't sleep. Tell me the answer.
On the bottom one should be the free DNA.
Okay.
The second one.
Let's label them. Lane number 1, lane number 2, lane number 3.
Lane number 2 should be the free DNA.
Okay. Lane number 1.
One should be for one histone, that is H2A, and the third one should be 2 histones.
Okay. Everybody followed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am, can you please repeat? Like, I didn't.
Okay, so I was trying to tell you that when, for example, so suppose you have a DNA and you want to determine that whether proteins bind to this DNA. So then there are several techniques to study this, and one of the technique which is based upon electrophoresis is called as EMSA, or electrophoretic mobility shift assay. It is also called as gel retardation assay. So the basis of this technique is that when you have free DNA, its mobility will be high, it will migrate faster, it will move farther from the well of the gel, right? Whereas when it is bound to protein, then its mobility will be retarded. The mobility will decrease because the molecular weight is now molecular weight of DNA plus molecular weight of protein. So the overall total molecular weight is more, and therefore the mobility will be less. Right. So that is what I was trying to tell you, that when you have a gel, right, you imagine this, that these are the wells of the gel, and then I have drawn 3 bands, right? So I was asking the question like, what is the mobility of each of the band? I mean, one is 146 base pair of DNA, one is 146 base pair DNA bound with histone H2A, the other one is 146 base pair DNA bound with H2A and H2B both. So then identify the bands. That was the question. Ratnesh, is it clear or no?
Yes, ma'am, it is clear. Ma'am, but can't it be like when it is bound to protein, like it is wrapped around the protein? In that case, it have less friction, so it can go like I think like faster.
Right, so your imagination is actually true because you are imagining that the DNA will wrap around, so that ways it should migrate. But then the point is the molecular weight, because remember we discussed when we were discussing electrophoretic mobility, it depends upon the molecular weight also. So overall the molecular weight would increase, right? So therefore it will migrate, it will be retarded. Also, so the imagination that you are making is that the DNA will be wrapped around. So when we say wrapping around, it has to have 8 molecules. You remember that? 2 of each of the histone, then only it will wrap around. But each of these histones bind to DNA individually. So therefore you imagine like a scale, and on a scale if a protein binds, right? Maybe I can, let me try if I can draw it from here. So you imagine that, right, so you imagine this is the free DNA, and over here you have a free DNA which is actually bound to protein, something like this. This one will migrate slower because the mobility is retarded, because the molecular weight is more. It cannot wrap around because it has attached to a single place. Ratnesh.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
right? So likewise, the way I have drawn here. So what about others? Are you people following Gopika Dhwani?
Yes, ma'am.
So something like this. Right? So this will be further retarded. Ratnesh.
Yes, ma'am. But in case of in case of like eight histones, can it be like it go like faster?
No, so when you have 8 histones, the overall molecular weight will be much higher. So its mobility will be again not equal to or less than 146 base pair DNA. It will be different, slightly different because of the wrapping around, but again because of the increased molecular weight, its mobility will be different. So now the question is how to determine that which band corresponds to the one which has migrated faster because of the wrapping around of the DNA, or which band corresponds to the one where one molecule of histone is there, where two molecules of histone is there, right? So in this case class, one of the technique that is used is you can actually label the protein. That is one possibility. Possibility two is you can label the DNA. So we are going to discuss both of these methods in the later classes, like how exactly we can label the protein and how exactly we can label the DNA. We can label the DNA.
Ma'am,
And
just a second.
yes,
Ma'am, why
yes.
would you even want to label the DNA if you can like easily label the protein with GFP or anything?
Right. So what happens is, Vishantan, that if you can easily label the protein because you can tag you can have antibodies which are specific to the protein, and then you can use antigen antibody based method for detection of proteins. But still, many a times people prefer that you tag the DNA because you want to have the overall picture, right? So the band is shifted with respect to what? Right, so when we label the protein, we will not be able to see the free DNA at all.
Right, ma'am.
So therefore, I mean, whenever we are observing a shift or a retardation, you want to compare it with the free DNA, because every time you are comparing the mobility, the electrophoretic mobility is compared with respect to the free DNA, which is not bound to protein, and then you try to compare the mobility when it is bound to one protein, two protein, three proteins, like that. Yes.
Ma'am, one more thing. I didn't like really get what exactly is this like used for practically.
This is used for identifying the proteins which bind to the DNA. So the reason I took the example of histones was because the way histones were discovered were when they did the DNA's digestion, they found that there was one component which they called it as nucleosome, which was not digested, remember? And then they found that it contained 146 base pair of DNA and 8 molecules of histone, 2 copies of each of 2A, 2B, 3 and 4. But then once you demonstrate this, you need to experimentally verify that indeed you can reconstitute it. So for that, what you do is you can take 146 base pair DNA and then you incubate it with 2A, then you incubate it with 2B, then 3 and then 4, and then see the structure, something like this. This technique is often, this technique is widely used, I would say, to study DNA replication, to study transcription, to study translation, to study gene regulation, everything. Because whenever you, for example, wherever you see genes are getting expressed, that means RNA polymerase binds to the DNA, right? So then how to identify where the RNA polymerase is binding? Correct. Likewise, for example, you have exonucleases, you have single-stranded DNA binding protein. So where is it binding? How do you determine that? You have replication. So you say that at the origin of the replication, the initiator protein binds and DNA replication starts. But then how do you determine that, okay, this is the place where the replication protein binds. This is the place where the replication bubble will form. You're getting my point.
Yes, ma'am.
So for answering all of these, like it's a very, so that is why class I wanted to tell you people, because see, you people are going to graduate just with a BTech degree, and I think you will not find all of this information in any other course. So I thought, I mean, I always discuss these fundamentals because then I think the understanding of replication, transcription, translation, gene regulation will become easy. Mane, the basis was, I hope after understanding this you will be able to imagine that like how people would have determined that look, this is the protein, this is the helicase, this is the SSP, single stranded binding protein, or this is the restriction enzyme, right? So all of these techniques are very useful.
Also, like after performing this EMSA, they'll have to look at it with other methods, right, to actually determine exactly where it binds.
Yes, no, so even with IMSA, you can determine where it binds. So what you do is that in IMSA, the way people try to identify is that we are going to discuss this in later classes as well. Ki 146 base pairs. We say, for example, histone binds to a 6 base pair sequence, very specific 6 base pair sequence. So what you do is that you change the nucleotide sequence of that 6 nucleotide region, and then again you perform EMSA. If you do not see shift, that means the sequence was that. Followed?
Okay. And ma'am, like how do they identify which 146 base pair sequence do those proteins, or like for example any amount of like any length of oligos, how do they identify which chain length do the proteins bind to?
Yes, for this the easiest experiment is that you try to see, for example, you start with 1 kb and then you start trimming from 5 prime end or from 3 prime end, and then you, for example, in a gel you have 10 lanes. So you prepare a ladder of DNAs from 1 kb to 900, 800, 700 and so on. So you try trimming and then see wherever you are getting the shift. This is a very common way which people use it in my lab as well as in not in other labs in the department, at least in my lab, or otherwise in the world you will find many labs which are using this technique, but we are using
Fine,
in
ma'am.
my lab for studying gene regulation.
Ma'am, you described that like histone binds to like 6 base pairs or
No, I was just
some
taking an
specific
example.
base pairs.
Yes, I was just taking an example that, so histone is just an example, but you can have HU, IHF, FIS, and the binding sites can vary from 4 base pair actually to as large as 17 or 18 base pairs. So the binding sites really vary a lot.
Okay, ma'am. But yeah, uh, while creation of chromosome, like we have a chromatin and a nucleosome array. Like
Yes,
so,
yes.
it is made of like nucleosome. So
Yes.
then in that case, like nucleosomes are everywhere.
Nucleosomes are everywhere.
Then
Yes.
then in that case, like these DNA sequences are present everywhere. Like
Yes, so see this, the recognition site can vary a lot, class. So for example, the recognition site, the way people describe it is, for example, the very common recognition sequence for RNA polymerase is this sequence. The sequence for RNA polymerase, right? And then this is spanned by a gap of 17 base pair, and then you have another sequence called, this is the sequence, right? So this is kind of specific sequence, but in the example which you are talking about, specificity is relaxed. So in this case you can have a sequence like this, like this. So here the specificity is relaxed, so you will find multiple places where the sequence can bind, something like this. N can be any, A, T, G or C.
No, ma'am. I was asking like these normal histones like H1 and H2A, H2B. For these also want to a specific like sequence, and those sequence are present in the DNA like human genome like in the DNA, in the whole strand of DNA, then that will
Yes.
be like a
Yes.
lot of repetition, like.
Lot of repetition. So that is why you remember in one of the classes we discussed that the proteins can be of two types: general DNA binding proteins or specific DNA binding proteins. You remember that when we were discussing localization? So general DNA binding proteins are the ones which can bind at multiple places. The specificity is not much there. But when we talk about specific DNA binding proteins, they recognize a specific 4 base pair, 6 base pair, 8 base pair, or 13 base pair in case of IHF. So then the binding is specific, right? Ratnesh?
Yes, ma'am. But like for these, is there like DNA sequencer? Like I just asking.
Yes, DNA sequencing can be done.
Like H2A, H2B for
Yes,
H2A, H2B.
right. It's possible. We are going to discuss this in a little more detail later when I'll be teaching you DNA sequencing. And like Vishantan said, ki, is this the only technique? So there are more techniques as well, which you will slowly learn. Let's go step by step, otherwise you will mix up everything. So the technique is called as DNA footprinting, which I will be discussing when I will teach you DNA sequencing. Okay. Class, what happened? Should I continue?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. You can continue.
Okay. So then I hope the analysis of DNA protein interactions is clear to the class using EMSA and gel retardation assay. So the next is electrophoresis of proteins. So many a times we are interested in just identifying the proteins. So I think this part you have studied already, so we are going to go through quickly. So when we do separation of proteins, the gel that is usually used is polyacrylamide gel class. But then, as I told you in the first class, that we do use agarose gel, and I'll be giving you examples like when exactly we use agarose and when exactly we use polyacrylamide gels. So usually it's polyacrylamide gel. The electrophoresis of proteins can be done in two ways. One is called continuous electrophoresis and the other one is called as discontinuous electrophoresis. So continuous electrophoresis is when you have a gel which is like continuous, where separation is based upon size, shape, etc. And discontinuous is when you have two different gels which actually lead to discontinuity. This discontinuity class is with respect to two main features. So discontinuity is with respect to pH, number one, and with respect to pore size. Okay, so the conventional discontinuous gel that you people have studied is called STS page. It was discovered by a scientist called UK Lamley, and that is why this method is also called as Lamley's method. So in this case, you have discontinuity in the gel in the sense that you see two layers of gel, right? So the bottom one is called as a resolving gel and the top one is called as a stacking gel. So I guess this you people have studied in the previous classes or no? What?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So stacking gel and resolving gel. Stacking gel is present at the and resolving gel is present underneath the stacking gel. The stacking gel has larger pore sizes. The resolving gel has smaller pore sizes. Stacking gel, when we prepare the gel, the pH of the gel is 6.8. Whereas when we prepare the resolving gel, the pH is 8.8. So you see the discontinuities with respect to the pore size. That means the above gel, the top gel has bigger pores and a pH of 6.8, and the bottom gel, which is called as resolving gel, has smaller pores and a pH of 8.8. When we prepare the gel, the conventional reagents are the same. For example, you are going to add acrylamide, you are going to add bisacrylamide, you are going to add TEMET, you are going to add APS. APS is the initiator, but other than that, you are going to add SDS, right? So now what is SDS? So SDS, the class is aware of, it is an anionic detergent, right? Here, when we were discussing genomic DNA isolation, this anionic detergent was helping in the lysis of the cells. But in this case, the anionic detergent, the purpose is that it imparts negative charge to the proteins and denatures them. Okay. So what happens is that when we treat with SDS, the SDS actually imparts negative charge to the protein and it also denatures them. Right? Oh, it's already. We also use DDT, which is actually a reducing agent. Should I stop here? Kya? You people have class, another class after this. You people have another class after this?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay, so I guess I should stop here. It's already 10. So if you have any questions on this part, we can discuss in the next class.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay, so we will resume the discussion on SDS page in the next class.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.